It was a disappearance that haunted a family and a community for more than a year. A woman vanishing without a trace. No answers, no closure, just questions. What happened to Jill? And now a major break in the case.
And observed in the garage what appeared to be a large patched area that was approximately 5 feet long and 3 feet wide.
Hidden in plain sight, and a suspect who is never far, revealing something in court no one saw coming. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick, I want to tell you about this app that can help you in a big way. It is called Upside. Upside gets you cash back on everyday purchases like gas, groceries, and takeout. So here's what you do. You download Upside. It's free to download. You claim an offer at one of their 100,000 plus locations. Then you pay like you typically would with your card. Then you verify the purchase and you get real money back. I've used Upside, say I need it when I pump gas or doing takeout one night. I'll search for offers on Upside. Then after I spend, money appears in my app. And right after that, I just transfer it straight to my bank. Upside's frequent users earn an average of $254 back a year. So to start getting your cash back, click the link in the description or scan the QR code and use promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents bonus on every gallon on your first tank of gas. When someone goes missing, it can lead authorities down several paths. You think, was this person kidnapped, or maybe they just ran away? Or was it something even darker than anyone would want to imagine? Those are the questions law enforcement, including the FBI, had been asking since January 2025 about a woman in Massachusetts named Jill Kloppenburg. Now, here's the missing persons poster for Jill Kloppenburg. You can see her face on it, her information. This was posted on the FBI's website. Here's what we know about Jill. She lived in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is a small city about 40 miles north of Boston. The FBI said the last time that anyone saw her was January 2025, specifically January 2nd. And she was last seen leaving her building on Broadway in Lowell. It's a place where they say she was temporarily staying with friends. Jill wasn't reported missing, though, until February 2025. Law enforcement say that the friends of Jill's who decided to call her in as missing hadn't actually spoken to her since the fall of 2024.
The individuals who made that missing persons report said that Ms. Kloppenburg was a friend of theirs, that they had not physically seen her since August of 24, and their last contact via text message had been on November 20th of 2024.
One clue police had, though, was the last time Jill's phone was used, and that was specifically used on January 14th, 2025. But after that, it seemed that her case had run cold. Where she was, what happened to her, it was unclear. Jill's name was put into a database for missing persons, and for more than a year, her case kind of just sat there. There were no major developments. How does someone like that just vanish? Well, that question appears to have been answered in 2026, specifically this month on March 10th. Authorities say this case was cracked because of a tip that came into police about a half hour north of Lowell over the state line in Nashua, New Hampshire.
However, on March the 10th, 2026, the Nashua, New Hampshire Police Department received a call with information about a possible homicide. They then had contact with the person who had called them, who explained that he had a friend. Friend's name was Shawn Sullivan, Shawn with a W, who had told him that he allegedly killed a woman named Jill at his home in or around January of 2025. Shawn allegedly further claimed that he had shot her and then buried her under the floor in a garage in the Audrey Avenue, Tingsboro home where he was living.
The secret of what may have happened to Jill apparently was not a secret to the person who is allegedly responsible. And that man's name is Shawn Sullivan. He's 40 years old, and here he is on Facebook. Perhaps ironically, he lists himself as a criminal justice major at Worcester State. Now, we looked up Shawn on Facebook, and we looked up his mutual friends. And look at this here. You can see he was connected to Jill Kloppenburg. Now, the tip out of New Hampshire claimed that Shawn Sullivan had told the tipster that he allegedly killed a girl named Jill, and beyond that, her body was buried beneath the garage of his home in Tingsboro, Massachusetts, roughly 5 miles from the building where Jill was last seen leaving in January 2025. To this point, what the tone was of that alleged admission isn't clear. Was this Shawn Sullivan bragging to a buddy, trying to seem tough, saying that he had killed somebody and buried her body? Or was this something where he allegedly admitted to a friend, confiding in a person who he could trust, or at least he thought, because the guilt over the last year of what he had allegedly done was just too heavy to bear? That's still unclear at this point. But what is clear is what police say they found inside his home, specifically under his garage. Police went to his house. Here it is on Google Maps, and that's where they searched the garage.
On March the 15th, detectives from the Tingsboro Police Department, the Tewksbury Police Department, and the State Police executed a search warrant on that house in Tingsboro and observed in the garage what appeared to be a large patched area that was approximately 5 feet long and 3 feet wide. They used ground-penetrating radar to scan the full garage floor, and they confirmed that something was located under that area that had been cut and patched. Working with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, the investigators were subsequently able to cut through the floor of the garage and to recover a bag, a plastic bag, containing what has been confirmed by the medical examiner's office as human remains.
Police in New Hampshire saw that there was a missing Jill Kloppenburg in the database, and they confirmed that she was known to Shawn Sullivan. Police say that the two of them were actually considered friends. Now, the extent of that relationship, how close they really were, it's unclear. They also say that Kloppenburg had been to Sullivan's home in the past, and she had been around him around the last time she was seen. Even though the Middlesex County District Attorney at her news conference said Jill's name in announcing Sullivan's arrest, at that time she said that the body that was allegedly found in Sullivan's home was being considered a Jane Doe until they could confirm scientifically the remains were Jill's. But Jill's uncle took to Facebook and he wrote this. Quote, "Yesterday evening, a police car pulled into my driveway and the officer came to my door, asked to come in, and mentioned my niece's name. He was doing the death notification and giving me the name of a detective to call. They found my niece's remains in the woods in Massachusetts. They could tell me they were 100% positive the remains were hers, though they still have to confirm it with DNA, and an autopsy has to be done to try to determine a cause of death. She's been missing for 14 months and has probably been out there the whole time. She was a lost soul and may finally be at peace now. She had problems with drugs and picking violent men, and now, though we were not particularly close, I find myself walking around since with eyes watery on the edge of tears for her loss, for what could have been. There will be a resolution." These are the charges that Sullivan is now facing.
Shawn Sullivan, who is 40 years old from Tingsboro, has been and will be charged with additional charges, including murder. That murder will be of a Jane Doe, since we do not have a confirmation as to the identification of the human remains found in the garage. He'll also be charged with assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, causing serious bodily injury, and improper disposal of human remains.
On Tuesday, Shawn Sullivan faced a judge in Lowell District Court for the first time. He looked down and looked sad and distraught for the most part. His attorney stood in the way of the camera for the majority of the hearing. This is video per Boston Fox 25. A bombshell that came out of this hearing was that Sullivan's attorney didn't deny that his client was the one who fired the gun, but he said that this case should be about manslaughter, not murder. Prosecutors claim that Sullivan admitted to law enforcement that he did fire the gun that killed Jill Kloppenburg. Sullivan allegedly said that Jill was at his house and he took a gun out of a safe just to show her, but allegedly he made somewhat of a twitching motion, and that's when the gun went off, shooting Jill. The bullet hit Jill in the chest, they say, and then it went out her back. What happened next is absolutely horrific. Sullivan then, in what his attorney called an inexcusable panic, buried Jill's body under his garage, where what happened to her remained a secret for more than a year. The judge ruled that Sullivan needed to be held without bond, and he is next due in court on April 17th. It's unclear, again, just how close the relationship was between Sullivan and Kloppenburg and why she went to his house on the night that she lost her life. It is also unclear if there were any bad feelings between the two that could be a possible motive for murder in this case. Joining us now to talk more about this case, retired detective and law enforcement instructor Matt Irvine. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for being with us to talk about this. So Shawn Sullivan is alleging that he is the one. It's not that he's alleging. Shawn Sullivan is saying he's the one who shot Jill Kloppenburg. But the story that he and his attorney is giving is that it was really just an accident because he was going to show her the gun and it hits her because he was either drifting asleep or had some sort of twitching motion. Yeah, I think a lot of people could see that and be like, it's a little suspect more than a year after you allegedly put her body under your garage. But as law enforcement, how do you prove that this was murder and it's not that this particular story that he is telling now that he's been arrested?
It's a great question. I mean, first of all, we have to accept that it is certainly possible. I mean, people do shoot people accidentally, unfortunately, all the time. The question is it credible? And is it either verified or debunked by the rest of the evidence in this case? So I would hope that the police are examining this defense along at least three dimensions. The first is, how does his account to police of this shooting, and my understanding is this account sort of evolved or emerged over the course of questioning. It wasn't something he immediately offered. But how does his final version of what happened as recounted to police compare to the disclosure he apparently made to a friend a month or so ago? Are they consistent or are they divergent? The other question is his statement credible and consistent just kind of within the four corners of what he's saying? That is he able to explain the nature of his relationship with this woman, the events preceding the shooting, and the events of the shooting themselves in a way that makes sense? As you said, why is he apparently drifting off to sleep with a loaded gun in his hand with somebody else in the room? And then, most importantly, is his statement consistent or inconsistent with the forensic and ballistic evidence in this case? His account is going to have some either verifiable or debunkable elements if he's able to talk about it in any kind of detail at all. And the trajectory of the wound pattern, if any of that is still available to investigators after she's been unfortunately buried for a year, the place in the home where this occurred. There's a lot of things that you would look for that would be present and consistent if his account is true, or would be divergent if he's making it up. And then the last thing is, generally when people make up a story, they only tend to work it out to about the first or second level of detail. So if the questioning is good, if it's sustained and it goes into the third and fourth and fifth level of detail, and he's lying, typically when that happens, those stories tend to fall apart. The people fall apart emotionally because of the cognitive load, and the story just doesn't hang together. So all of those are ways that you could either confirm or debunk his account of what happened.
And because the tip that came in, I don't know what type of contact, if any, the Nashua, New Hampshire Police Department has with the person he allegedly told this to. But it seems to have been it clearly was a very credible tip, not just in the fact that he said that he had killed someone named Jill, but that he had put her body beneath his garage. And then they go and search the garage. And then that's where they found Jill Kloppenburg's body. What does that tell you about this suspect, that maybe he confided in somebody in I think of maybe just the weight of guilt? Or was it something where he was trying to sound tough to somebody he knew to say well, this is what I did to this person? Just the fact that that tip turned out to be very true. What does that tell you about Shawn Sullivan?
We haven't heard a lot about the tone of that conversation with the friend in New Hampshire. So it's kind of hard to get at motivation, but I would say more broadly, most people have a conscience. Most people, even people that do terrible things, are troubled by it. They feel guilt, shame, remorse, and the burden of carrying around this terrible secret is often overwhelming for a lot of suspects. That's one reason why a lot of suspects, when properly questioned by police, confess, even though it is absolutely not legally in their interest to do so. They feel a sense of relief when they have the opportunity to unburden themselves to somebody that they think is listening to them in a what they perceive anyway to be a non-judgmental and empathetic way. And a lot of folks will give up their very freedom for that opportunity to unburden themselves to somebody that they think can understand.
It's interesting too, though, where, even if he had confided in the friend, when law enforcement came calling, it didn't seem like he was that honest right out of the gate. And it took a couple conversations to get to the point where he said, yes, this is what happened. And then he's come up, maybe it's the reality of what happened where he was, just showing off the gun and it happened to go off. I mean, very different case, but it's almost like the Alec Baldwin, type defense of like, you're not meaning for the gun to go off, but it does. And how do you prove that there was intent behind it? How do you investigate this scene where, I mean, he's lived in the house, I believe, since then too. Like, how do you investigate this scene and try and figure out how the bullet hit Jill Kloppenburg and what, this situation happened where there's no video of it and only two people were there were Shawn Sullivan and Jill Kloppenburg?
So we're going to have to get a little bit grisly in order to kind of discuss the crime scene forensics here. And I apologize in advance because I know that Jill Kloppenburg is a real person that people loved and cared about. But in addition to being a person and a victim in this case, Jill Kloppenburg herself is unfortunately at this point also a crime scene. Her body is a crime scene. There's two crime scenes in a case like this. There's the place where the crime happened, and there's the person that the crime happened to. And in the case of Jill Kloppenburg, there's going to be information that her body, her remains, are telling us about the trajectory of the round that went through her body, the closeness when that round was fired. There's certain characteristics that are present when a round is fired at a person at close range versus at distance. The angle of entry, and in this case of exit, is either going to be consistent with where Shawn Sullivan says she was in relation to him and how their bodies were positioned, or it's going to be inconsistent, which is going to tend to debunk his account of what happened. Unfortunately, in this case, there's apparently an exit wound. And when there is an exit wound, there tends to be a lot of blood and tissue that is present at the scene. And in my experience, most people, if they're not crime scene experts, don't do a great job of cleaning up after themselves. Blood can go through carpet, it can go through flooring, and even if you clean the heck out of the surface, very often when you start pulling up floorboards or pulling up carpeting, you're going to find evidence of blood. And where that blood is either going to, again, be consistent with what Shawn Sullivan is saying, or it's going to be inconsistent. So you're going to be looking at the place where it happened, and you're going to be looking at the person that it happened to. And even a year later, I would expect that there's going to be useful evidence in both of those places.
And this is also a grisly comment, but to know that there was an exit wound, and I just think of a body that was in, it was beneath the surface for more than a year. I mean, what does that say about how strong evidence that there may be from a forensic point of view, that at least at this point, the condition that the remains were in were enough where a medical examiner or coroner could look and say that there was someone who was allegedly shot and then an exit wound that left a body?
Yeah, it's really hard to know based on what's being publicly reported what the condition of Ms. Kloppenburg's remains were when they were examined, but basic things like an entry and exit wound should still be observable sometime after, again, depending on the condition. So really hard to know. It sounds like she was wrapped in some kind of plastic, which may have helped protect her from degradation in the year that she spent underground. It's really hard to know what her body is able to tell us at this point, but I would expect at least basic things like trajectory should be observable at this point.
I think back to when she was first reported missing, which was February of last year, and then it was in January was the last time, according to the FBI, she was seen. I think it was January 2nd. She was leaving her home and where she was living with some friends at an apartment building, it looks like in Lowell, Mass. And it's just a case that seems like it just kind of sat there for a year, and there was just not a lot of leads. Like, how do you, in the beginning of these cases where I also think of the family and they didn't know what happened to her. I know her uncle had said that she had some struggles in her life, and she, and I'm sure that they had held on to hope that she was going to, that this wouldn't be the conclusion that we would be talking about in this case. But typically when that missing persons report comes in and you're thinking of all possibilities, like, what is the beginning stages of trying to figure out where someone went? And then how does it get to a place where you search Jill Kloppenburg's name and the FBI has a website and here's her picture. And if you have information, give it a call, where it just kind of gets to this place where you don't know if that tip from New Hampshire is ever going to come in.
Yeah, missing persons cases are tough. Missing adult cases, absent some other information that raises suspicion or creates a sense of a sort of imminent danger, they're just typically not investigated all that thoroughly, because many adults who go missing voluntarily. Most often, they're not cases of foul play. Sometimes there are cases that involve suicide or mental illness or accident. But again, absent additional information that would kind of raise the level of concern, most of those cases, after a sort of initial and cursory investigation where you look at basic things like electronic activity, cell phone geolocation, financials, contacts with friends and loved ones, once those leads are exhausted, most often those cases do go cold until something changes that.
And what a change, in this case, just to think, and also to the Nashville Police Department to be able to follow up on a case and try and piece it together, because I'm sure there are times that tips will come in and you want to investigate every single one of them. But this one, it really seemed to hit and then lead to a major arrest. Going back to Shawn Sullivan's story that he's telling, that this was all allegedly an accident. How does the fact that, and in his attorney's words, it was an inexcusable panic that he decided he was going to bury her body beneath his own garage. The fact that he did that, though, that he hid the body, held on to this secret for years until he allegedly tells a friend, like, how does that factor into the way that you view his story? That this was someone who, he's saying, oh, it was an accident, I panicked, I didn't know what to do. And it wasn't until he was arrested that suddenly the information came out after a couple of conversations. How does that part of it, what he did after, factor into the charges that he's facing right now?
That's an excellent point. And yeah, as you're sort of suggesting, this does not sound like inexcusable panic. I wouldn't be surprised if it were an accident and somebody might panic in the immediate aftermath of a shooting that was unintentional, but you would expect certain things to happen differently. First of all, at least what's being reported, it sounds like she did not die immediately. And so in the case of an accident, you would think there would be some effort to render aid, call 911, get medical assistance for that person. Sounds like this happened in a home he shares with other people. There was no apparent alerting of the other occupants of this home. So the kinds of things you would expect in the aftermath of an accident didn't happen. And what instead happened, apparently, is that he kept her remains in his room for a period of days. So those are days in which he had every opportunity to reconsider, to make a better choice, and didn't. And then he took the further step to excavate a section of his basement and wrap her in plastic and bury her there. So, panic, in my mind, isn't something that goes on for days and days and days. And then, as you said, to persist for over a year as friends and loved ones of Jill's are literally coming to his door, apparently, with flyers. And to continue to keep silent. There may be other motivations there, but panic just doesn't seem to fit.
The DA in Middlesex County said, I guess they were friends or friendly to some extent. We don't know a lot about their relationship, how close they actually were, why she was at his house on that particular night. But does any of that matter? Like in terms of motive when it comes to building a case? If you have the fact that her body was found, you have the forensics, you have him as someone who's alleging something happened, but he's not exactly the most trustworthy person since he kept it to himself for 14 months until it comes out. Like, does, any sort of, there was conflict between the two. Like, do you need that piece of information to get a jury to believe that this was murder, not manslaughter?
So motive is not a requirement for the crime of murder, but it helps in a case like this. And particularly, it helps to counter a defense of accident. So yeah, the nature of their relationship is going to be important. The nature of what happened immediately preceding the shooting is going to be important. I'd be very curious to understand his explanation of why he is supposedly nodding off with a loaded gun, and one telling sort of laid across his chest. while this woman is present in his home. Those circumstances seem very particular and unusual, and I'd like to kind of know the bigger story behind that. I would certainly be wanting to talk to people who knew both of them to find out if there was some unrequited love or some breakup or some conflict, some tension between them that might explain this violence. I'd also want to know, in the case of Shawn Sullivan, what is his history in terms of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, assaultive behavior, or menacing behavior towards other people. What's his experience with firearms, either in terms of using them aggressively or handling them responsibly? Either one of those is going to be information that's going to be important to understand how this happened.
And we'll see what happens next. I mean, obviously, you feel for the family of Jill, Kloppenburg, who I'm sure we're holding on to hope that she would, come home one day and this wouldn't be the ending, but hopefully they do get some closure in this case as the legal proceedings will move forward. Matt Irvine, retired detective, law enforcement instructor. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for talking about this case with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Sullivan is due back in court on April 17th, and we'll continue to follow this case closely. That will do it for this episode of On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and you can also find our episodes streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.